I started measuring time differently, not in payments or court dates but in quiet wins. A full night's sleep, a morning coffee without dread, a workday that didn't end with exhaustion soaked in worry. These weren't small things, they were proof that my life belonged to me again. I kept therapy but less often, bi-weekly turned into monthly. Charlotte noticed it before I did. She said my stories had changed. Fewer questions about Jason. More plans about me. I talked about renovating the condo's kitchen, about mentoring nurses, about saving for a trip I'd postponed for years. I didn't feel healed. I felt whole. At the hospital, I was asked to help design a training program for new hires. I said yes and surprised myself by enjoying it. Teaching came easily now. I'd learned hard lessons and could pass them on without bitterness. Boundaries. Documentation, saying no without guilt. I started journaling again, not to vent but to track progress. I wrote down numbers, savings milestones, rental income, days off taken without panic. I also wrote down rules I promised myself I'd never break again. No shared finances without transparency. No secrets in the name of love, no sacrificing my future to rescue someone from theirs. One afternoon, I met Alana for a routine review. She smiled when she turned her screen toward me. The charts were steadier, less volatility, more cushion. We adjusted contributions and talked about conservative growth. She said, "You're not rebuilding anymore, you're building forward." That sentence stayed with me. Forward meant something else too. I donated some time to the support group that helped me early on. I didn't share details, just patterns to watch for, questions to ask, safeguards to set. I watched shoulders relax when people realized they weren't cruel for protecting themselves. They were wise. Then came the anniversary I'd been dreading, the day I discovered the truth at the grocery store. I expected it to hurt. It didn't. It felt like a marker, a line between who I was and who I became. That night I cooked a real dinner for myself and invited Martina over. We laughed. We toasted to survival and stubborn hope. She told me I was different now, quieter, stronger, less willing to negotiate with nonsense. I took that as a compliment. Later alone, I opened the old folder one last time, the letters, the filings, the spreadsheets. I didn't linger. I closed it and labeled the tab resolved. Not forgiven, not forgotten. Resolved. The choice came quietly. No dramatic phone call, no emergency. Just a simple message passed through my attorney's office. Jason wanted to speak to me, not to ask for money, not to negotiate, just to talk. I didn't answer right away. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the message, noticing how calm my body felt. No racing heart, no shaking hands. That alone told me how much had changed. Charlotte asked me one question during our next session. "What do you need right now?" Not what Jason wanted, not what a good mother was supposed to do, what I needed. The answer surprised me. I didn't need a conversation. I already had accountability. I already had boundaries. I already had proof that I could survive without his approval or honesty. So I told my attorney to respond politely but firmly. I wasn't ready for contact. Maybe someday. Not now. Jason respected that. Months passed. Life settled into something steady, predictable, safe. I worked. I saved. I managed my properties. I met friends for dinner without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I slept deeply. One day at the hospital, a patient's family thanked me for staying late to explain things calmly. My supervisor later mentioned I'd become someone younger nurses looked up to. That felt better than any apology. I realized something important. The worst betrayal of my life didn't break me, it clarified me. It showed me where my limits were and how strong I could be when I finally enforced them. And then, unexpectedly, I received another letter, not from Jason, from myself. Notes I'd written during the darkest months, fearful thoughts, angry questions, pages filled with self-blame. I read them slowly, recognizing the woman who wrote them and the woman reading them now. They weren't the same person. The idea of forgiveness followed me like a shadow. Not the soft, comforting version people like to talk about, but the complicated one that asks uncomfortable questions. Did forgiveness mean letting Jason back into my life? Did it mean pretending the damage never happened? Charlotte was clear. Forgiveness is not access. Forgiveness is not trust. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's simply deciding not to let anger keep owning your future. Jason finished his final payments earlier than expected. My attorney confirmed everything was complete and properly filed. The case was closed. Legally, emotionally, it felt unfinished. A week later, another letter arrived, shorter this time. No explanations, no justifications. He wrote that he understood if I never wanted contact. He thanked me for holding him accountable when no one else did. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't feel relief or closure. I felt quiet. I met with my financial advisor soon after. She showed me updated projections. With 2 rental properties now and steady savings, I could retire at 69. A modest life, a secure one. It wasn't the future I planned, but it was a future I owned. I told her I felt proud and sad and stronger all at once. At work, I was offered another leadership role. I accepted it without hesitation. I wasn't afraid of responsibility anymore. I'd already survived the worst kind, loving someone who betrayed me. One evening, while cleaning out old files, I found the fake medical school acceptance letter. I almost threw it away. Instead, I filed it with the legal documents. A reminder, not of shame, but of how far I'd come. Jason never called, never showed up. He He respected the boundary that mattered. One afternoon, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't waiting for him anymore, not for an apology, not for explanation, not for reconciliation. My life had moved forward without him at the center, and that was the real recovery. Time did something I didn't expect. It softened the constant edge of anger not into forgiveness but into distance. Days passed where I didn't think about Jason at all, weeks where his name didn't tighten my chest. The automatic payments came and went without ceremony. That felt like progress. I took a short weekend trip with Martina to a quiet beach town, the first vacation I'd taken in years. We walked along the shore, talked about everything except Jason, and for the first time in a long while I felt like myself again, not someone's mother, not a financial lifeline, just me. Back at work, mentoring a new nurse named Rebecca, I recognized pieces of my old self in her. Generous, trusting, supporting her brother through school. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough to warn her gently about boundaries. Some lessons shouldn't require devastation. 8 months into the settlement, my financial advisor showed me something surprising. I was ahead of schedule. Between payments, my promotion, and tighter budgeting, I'd rebuilt a small cushion. Not comfort, but safety. Then my attorney called. Jason had been consistent, no missed payments, no complaints. He'd completed his required financial counseling. He'd taken a regular job. I didn't know how to feel about that. During therapy, Charlotte helped me name it, cautious acknowledgement. I could recognize positive actions without reopening wounds. Growth didn't require reconciliation. Then, almost a year after mediation, a letter arrived. Jason's handwriting, he didn't ask to see me, he didn't make excuses. He wrote that he understood now what he took, not just money but years of my life. He hoped someday I might forgive him. I read it 3 times. It felt different. Still, I didn't respond. Forgiveness, Charlotte reminded me, was something I could choose for myself, not something he was owed. 2 years passed. I bought a small condo, my first rental property since selling the last one. Modest, practical, mine. Standing in that kitchen signing closing papers, I felt a quiet pride that had nothing to do with anyone else. Jason kept paying, every month. 4 years in, my retirement account looked healthier than I'd dared to hope. Not restored, but rebuilt, piece by piece. Then my attorney called again. Jason was nearing the end of his payments, and he wanted to make sure everything was documented properly. That's when I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Respect. Not for what he did, but for following through, and that scared me more than the anger ever had. The pen felt heavier than it should have. When I signed the settlement, my signature shook, not from doubt but from finality. This chapter was closing whether I was ready or not. Jason signed next, his hand trembling just enough for me to notice. The mediator collected the papers and explained that once filed, the agreement would be legally binding. It was over. Outside the building, sunlight felt too bright. My attorney told me quietly that this was a good outcome. Many parents never recover anything at all. Jason would face consequences every month for years. I nodded. 2 weeks later, I checked my bank account and saw a deposit for $15,000, the proceeds from selling his DJ equipment. My chest tightened. Part of me hadn't believed he'd follow through. I transferred the money immediately into a new retirement account at a different bank. Protected, separate, mine. The first monthly payment arrived on time, $417. A strange mix of relief and grief washed over me. This wasn't support. It was restitution, a reminder of what was broken and what couldn't be repaired. Therapy helped me understand that both feelings could exist at the same time. I reduced my work schedule slightly, 1 extra shift instead of 2. My body needed the break. The money from the settlement made that possible. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. 3 months later, my financial advisor showed me new projections. They weren't comforting, but they weren't hopeless anymore. I could retire at 70 instead of 75, tight but possible. Then something unexpected happened. I was offered a promotion at work. Charge nurse, more responsibility, a modest raise. I accepted immediately. My supervisor said I seemed more focused lately. Lighter, she was right. I wasn't carrying the constant anxiety of being manipulated anymore. Months passed. Payments arrived regularly. I stopped checking obsessively. Automatic transfers moved the money straight into savings. I trained myself to think of it as what it was, a debt being repaid. One afternoon, my attorney forwarded me a letter. Jason wanted to apologize properly, asked for permission to call. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I started researching rental properties again, small condos, modest investments. This time, everything would be protected, no shared access, no blind trust. I joined a support group for parents who'd been financially abused by adult children. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone and less ashamed. Then one morning, a payment didn't arrive. My stomach dropped. Panic surged. 3 days later, it came through with an apology email for the delay. My attorney reminded me we had safeguards. One missed payment didn't undo everything. I breathed again. Healing, I learned, wasn't linear. Jason walked in last. No flashy clothes, no confidence, just khakis, a button-down shirt, and tired eyes. He avoided looking at me as he sat beside his lawyer, shoulders slightly hunched, like the weight of everything was finally pressing down. The mediator explained the rules, calm voices, honesty, good faith. This wasn't a courtroom, but it was close enough. Jason's lawyer spoke first. Jason was young and overwhelmed. Medical school was too much pressure. He made poor choices and regretted not being upfront. Not one word about fraud. Not one word about 3 years of lies. Not one word about intercepted mail or fake photos. I watched Jason nod quietly while his lawyer minimized everything. Then it was my turn. I unfolded the statement Charlotte helped me write. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. I read about double shifts, about swollen feet and aching backs, about rice and beans for dinner so I could send $5,000 every month. I read about cashing out my retirement early, selling my rental property, believing I was investing in my son's future as a doctor. I read about discovering the penthouse, the parties, the DJ business funded by my sacrifice. About $180,000 gone and hundreds of thousands more in lost security. I read about working 10 more years because my son chose to steal from me. When I finished, the room was silent. The mediator looked directly at Jason and asked if he understood the harm he caused. His lawyer tried to speak. The mediator stopped him. She waited. Jason finally said yes, barely above a whisper. She asked him to explain what he understood. This time he spoke. He admitted he knew it was wrong. That he kept telling himself he'd pay me back once he succeeded. That he was afraid to admit he failed medical school. I felt anger rise, sharp and hot. I leaned forward and said fear didn't stop him from lying every day for 3 years. Fear didn't stop him from intercepting my mail or watching me work myself into exhaustion. The mediator gently intervened and turned back to Jason. She asked him if fear justified fraud. He said no. Then came settlement terms. My attorney laid out our proposal calmly. Monthly payments, equipment sale, written admission of fraud, consequences for missed payments. Jason's lawyer countered with a lower number and no admission of wrongdoing. My attorney said no without hesitation. A break was called. In the hallway, Jason tried to approach me. My attorney stepped between us immediately. Mediation rules prohibited contact. Jason looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. 15 minutes later, we went back in. Negotiations dragged on for hours. Numbers went up, conditions shifted. My head ached under the fluorescent lights. Finally, we reached an agreement. Jason would repay $40,000 over 8 years, sell his equipment for an immediate payment, sign a document acknowledging fraud, attend financial counseling, no contact unless I initiated it. Mediator asked if we agreed. I said yes. Jason hesitated, then he said yes too. Mediation sounded civil, but nothing about this felt peaceful. My attorney explained it plainly. Mediation was Jason's attempt to control the damage. Court would expose everything: criminal fraud charges, public records, consequences he couldn't spin into a success story. Mediation meant quiet. It meant negotiation behind closed doors, and it meant I had leverage. Still, agreeing to mediation didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something heavy and irreversible. Part of me wanted a judge to look Jason in the eye and say what he did was wrong. Another part of me just wanted it over. We scheduled mediation 3 weeks out. That gave me time to prepare, not just legally but emotionally. Martina helped first. She came over one evening with takeout and sat across from me at my kitchen table. She played Jason in different scenarios, crying, apologizing, getting angry, guilt-tripping me about being a bad mother. Every manipulation I'd fallen for before. Each time I practiced responding calmly. I'm here to discuss accountability, not emotions. The documentation speaks for itself. This isn't about forgiveness, it's about responsibility. At first my voice shook. By the end of the night it didn't. I also started therapy. Charlotte's office was quiet, neutral, safe. She listened as I explained everything: the lies, the money, the betrayal. When she asked what hurt the most, I surprised myself. It wasn't the money. It was realizing the son I thought I had never really existed. Charlotte said something that stayed with me. I wasn't grieving one loss. I was grieving two: the financial future I built and the relationship I believed in. And I hadn't let myself fully mourn either yet. She helped me separate guilt from responsibility. Supporting your child isn't a mistake. Exploiting that support is. The week before mediation, my attorney and I finalized our demands. Jason would repay $50,000 over time, sell his equipment for an immediate payment, sign a document acknowledging fraud, face consequences if he missed payments. This wasn't revenge, it was accountability. 2 days before mediation, I barely slept. My body remembered every double shift, every exhausted night I worked for a dream that was never real. I reminded myself I wasn't doing this to hurt Jason. I was doing this to protect myself. The morning of mediation, I sat in my car outside the building for a full minute before getting out. My hands were steady, my breathing slow. I was ready, I just didn't know what version of Jason would walk through that door. Joshua's hands shook as he opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, receipts, expense reports, everything neatly organized with tabs and labels. He told me he'd spent days putting it together because he couldn't sleep after learning the truth. Jason told him the startup money came from an inheritance. If he'd known it came from me, he never would have accepted it. I believed him. He walked me through the numbers slowly, like he was afraid of hurting me further. Over $120,000 went straight into DJ equipment. Top-of-the-line turntables, speakers, lighting rigs, recording software, professional microphones. Jason insisted they needed the best gear to compete at a high level. Another $40,000 paid for the luxury apartment and the Tesla lease. Jason said image mattered, looking successful attracted bigger clients. The rest, about $20,000, disappeared into trips. Miami, Vegas, Austin, Los Angeles, music festivals labeled as networking, business expenses that were really just vacations and parties. I asked about income. Joshua looked down. In 3 years, the business made about $30,000 total. Most gigs barely covered costs. Small parties, college events, nothing close to what Jason bragged about. The famous DJ collaboration was just a few emails with someone who had a modest regional following. No tour, no studio, no empire, just exaggeration stacked on top of lies. Joshua admitted Jason had a pattern, turning small opportunities into massive promises, convincing people his big break was always right around the corner. That confidence kept partners believing longer than the numbers ever justified. I asked why he stayed so long. Joshua said Jason was charismatic, magnetic. He made people feel lucky to be included. But now the partnership was over. Joshua wanted out. He offered to testify if this went to court. I took copies of everything and thanked him. Then I drove straight to my attorney's office. He spread the documents across his desk and studied them carefully, asked questions, made notes. After half an hour, he leaned back and smiled. This changes everything. Now we could trace every dollar, prove intent, prove theft. The intercepted mail showed deception. The fake photos showed ongoing fraud. But these records, they showed exactly where my money went. My attorney said we'd file an amended claim immediately. Jason couldn't pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. 2 weeks later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. It was Jason's father, my ex-husband. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. He said Jason contacted him asking for money and wanted to hear my side first. I told him everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he admitted Jason had done something similar to him years earlier, $10,000 for a fake medical program that turned into a party trip overseas. He offered to help with legal fees. I didn't know how to feel. But I accepted. 2 days later, my attorney called again. Jason's lawyer wanted mediation. They didn't want this going to court. That's when I knew they were scared. My attorney didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, we could take Jason to small claims court, but the maximum recovery in our state was $15,000, a fraction of what he stole. Filing would create an official legal record and apply pressure, but it wouldn't make me whole. Then he said something worse. If we could prove intentional deception, we might be able to pursue criminal fraud charges. Intercepted mail mattered. Fake photos mattered. The lies weren't mistakes, they were a system. I hung up and sat there staring at the wall, realizing the damage went far beyond stolen money. 2 days later, I sat in the office of a financial advisor named Alana. Her space was small and calm, certificates neatly framed on the wall. She asked me to bring everything: bank statements, tax returns, 401,000 paperwork, documents from the rental property sale. She spread them across her desk and started calculating. Her face stayed professional, but I saw her jaw tighten as the numbers stacked higher and higher. She turned her screen toward me. $180,000 sent directly to Jason. $90,000 in lost investment growth. $150,000 in lost property value from the rental I sold too early. $40,000 in penalties and taxes from my retirement withdrawal. Then the invisible costs. Lost compound interest. Reduced Social Security benefits. Years of double shifts that damaged my health. She scrolled down. $460,000. That was the real number. Not what he took, but what his lies cost me. Alana explained gently that I'd likely need to work 10 more years than planned. Maybe longer, depending on my health. My retirement wouldn't be comfortable anymore. It would be careful, tight. Every dollar would matter. I nodded like I understood. But it didn't feel real until I left her office and sat alone in my car. That's when I cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears that wouldn't stop. For the future I'd planned. For the security I thought I'd earned. For the years of my life I could never get back. Alana gave me resources, support groups, recovery programs, counselors who specialized in family financial abuse. The way she spoke told me I wasn't the first parent she'd seen like this. That somehow made it worse. 3 days later, my attorney called again. Jason's roommate Joshua had reached out. He wanted to talk. He had records. Financial documents, proof of where the money actually went. I didn't hesitate. Any truth was worth hearing now. We met the next day at a coffee shop near campus. Joshua looked young, nervous, guilty. He apologized before I even sat down. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was the paper trail my son never thought I'd see. He smiled when he took the envelope. That same confident smile he used when he pitched his dreams, when he talked about destiny and timing and the universe rewarding belief. He probably thought it was a check or a signed agreement. Or proof that I'd caved again. He opened it slowly. The first document was on law firm letterhead. His smile faltered. He skimmed the page once, then again, his eyebrows pulled together like the words didn't make sense. He flipped to the second document, a spreadsheet listing every single payment I'd made over 3 years, dates, amounts, transfers, notes. His hands started to shake. Then he pulled out the third paper. A small claims court filing for the maximum amount allowed in our state. The room went silent. He looked up at me like I'd switched languages without warning. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched the moment it finally hit him that I wasn't crying, begging, or apologizing this time. I'd acted. He laughed, not a real laugh, a thin, forced sound. He said it was ridiculous, said you can't sue your own child. That I was being dramatic. That's when I told him my attorney explained fraud is fraud, family doesn't change the law. I had proof of intercepted mail, fake photos, fabricated stories about rotations and professors. 3 years of lies documented and saved. His laugh died instantly. He changed tactics. Tears appeared like a switch flipped. His voice cracked perfectly as he said he thought I believed in him. That parents were supposed to support their children's dreams. That I was abandoning him when he needed me most. I stayed silent. I'd seen this performance before. Same trembling voice, same wounded expression. The same act he used years ago when he showed me his fake medical school acceptance letter. Back then, I hugged him, told him I was proud. This time, I just watched. When the tears didn't work, anger replaced them just as fast. He stood up so suddenly his chair scraped against the floor. He said if I went through with this, I'd lose him forever. No calls, no visits, no relationship. I told him I already lost him 3 years ago. That's when the roommates came out of their rooms. One of them looked genuinely shocked. He said quietly that they didn't know Jason was lying to me about school. Jason told them the money came from a trust fund. I believed him. Jason yelled at them to go back to their rooms. I walked out. My hands shook so badly in the car I could barely get the key into the ignition. But underneath the fear was something new, something stronger. Relief. I'd finally said no. I drove home and sat in my parking spot for 10 minutes just breathing. Then I called Martina. She told me she was proud of me. Said Jason had been manipulating me for years and I finally stood up to him. The next morning my phone exploded with messages. Apologies turned into threats. Threats turned into guilt trips. I screenshot everything and sent it straight to my attorney. He replied within an hour. This is excellent evidence, he said. That's when I realized this wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was a legal battle now. The door opened to a life I didn't recognize. Not the modest studio apartment I'd been paying for. Not the quiet place my son claimed he needed to study. This was a luxury penthouse, glass walls, designer furniture, neon lights glowing against polished floors, music equipment everywhere, turntables, speakers stacked like trophies. A full recording booth in the corner. 3 strangers sat on the couch holding drinks. My son stood in the middle of the room, headphones around his neck, casually mixing tracks like this was just another night. When he saw me, he didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. Why didn't you call first? He asked like I'd interrupted something trivial. That hurt more than any apology could have fixed. I asked him about medical school. He shrugged, just shrugged, said it wasn't for him, too much memorization. Too many rules. He'd found his real passion in music. He was building a brand now, making connections, creating something real. I asked about the $180,000. He smiled, confident, relaxed, and told me it wasn't wasted money. It was an investment, my investment. The money helped him network, buy equipment, travel, and set the foundation for success. Then he told me he'd made $30,000 last year. He said it proudly, as if that number meant something. I stood there realizing he'd given back 1/6 of what he stole and expected applause. When I started crying, he told me to stop being manipulative. Said parents support their kids' dreams, that I should be proud he found his calling. His roommates nodded along like this was normal, like I was the problem for not understanding. I left without saying another word, not because I forgave him, because I didn't trust myself not to break. 2 weeks passed, no apology, no explanation, no remorse. Then my phone rang, his voice was excited, energetic. Like nothing had happened. He told me a famous DJ wanted to collaborate. A huge opportunity, tour, a studio, an empire waiting to be built. He just needed $50,000 to get started. He said since I'd already invested so much in his education, what was a little more for his real career, he promised he'd pay me back double once he made it big, just like he promised to become a doctor. He said there wasn't time to think. Other investors were interested. This was our shot. We were a team. I wasn't just his mother, I was his business partner, and he was right about one thing. Without me, none of this would exist. I told him to come to my apartment so we could discuss terms. He arrived in a Tesla, said it was part of the image, part of the business. He brought contracts, spreadsheets, projections, everything planned. I'd be a silent partner. My name nowhere in writing, but I could trust him. I let him talk. I listened to every word, then I handed him an envelope. I used to believe sacrifice was love, that if you loved someone enough, you'd give until it hurt, and then give a little more. That belief is how I sent my son $5,000 every single month for 3 straight years. Tuition, rent, food, books, scrubs, everything. I wanted him focused, no stress, no distractions, just medical school. He called me his hero. He said I was the reason he could chase his dream of becoming a doctor. He sent photos in scrubs, texts about long nights studying, stories about professors who pushed him hard because they saw potential. He talked about rotations, exams, exhaustion. I believed every word. I worked double shifts as a nurse to afford it. ate rice and beans so he could eat better, cashed out retirement money early and swallowed the tax penalty, sold a rental property I planned to keep for old age. Every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed I was investing in my son's future. 3 years, $180,000, then one random grocery store trip cracked everything open. I ran into a woman I barely knew, my son's roommate's mother. She smiled warmly and mentioned how nice it was that the boys could build their entertainment company together. I laughed, assuming she was confused. My son lived alone. That's what he told me. He needed silence to study. Her smile faded. She said her son had lived with Jason for 3 years. They shared an apartment, threw parties almost every weekend, ran a DJ business together, equipment, gigs, travel. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Entertainment company, roommate? She looked embarrassed, like she'd said too much. I stood there frozen while she casually mentioned concerts, trips, and late nights mixing music instead of studying anatomy. That night, I made a call I never thought I'd have to make. I called the medical school. They confirmed my son withdrew after his first semester 3 years ago, failed his anatomy exam, never re-enrolled. The registrar said they sent multiple letters notifying the permanent address on file. My address? I never received a single one. That's when I realized the truth wasn't just betrayal, it was deliberate, calculated. My son had been intercepting my mail, lying to my face, letting me destroy my future so he could build a fake one. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I got in my car and drove to the address he'd never let me visit. But I saw there would change how I saw my son forever, and how I saw myself.